Right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you very, very much for joining this session number 7 of the visual sessions of this PCST conference 2020+1. It's a very special conference. It's a new kind of experience for all of us to do it this way, but it certainly makes it possible to also do new things. And one of the exciting things about this new format is that all the talks will be available online for delegates for at least up to a month after the conference. So I'm really excited about that and the online interaction that we hope will flow from these sessions. My name is Marina Yabar. I'm a science communication researcher in South Africa at Stellenbosch University, but I also worked as a practitioner, and I still do work in the practice of science communication and the training of young scientists. And that's why I'm particularly looking forward to today's session, which is about bridging theory and practice. And it's a crucial topic for our profession in science communication and also for scholarship in the field. So I'm really looking forward to the talks today. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers. They have a tough job because they only have 3 minutes to introduce their ideas, and these ideas are rich, and there's so much work behind it. So I invite you to enjoy it, but to also interact with the speakers during the Q&A. But also afterwards, follow-up interactions will definitely be possible. So as you listen to the talks, this is now for all our delegates who's joined us. Make a note of a talk that you really, really enjoy, because towards the end, I'm going to run a quick poll where I will ask you to vote for your favorite presenter, and the winning speaker of each of these sessions will go through to another session in the conference itself. So just keep a note, because it's going to be very, very hard to choose, I know, but that's what we're going to ask you to do. So the toughest part of my job today is to keep to time, to make sure that we have discussion at the end. And I don't want to waste any further time. I'm immediately going to ask our first speaker, Nemisha from Mexico, to start. And he's going to talk to us, kick it off by talking about dialogue between research and practice in science communication. Over to you, Nemisha.
Good day. I shall read, s'il vous plaît. Okay, can you see my presentation?
No, not yet. Can you just try again?
Yet.
We've just...
Okay. Okay.
There it is, yes. Please start.
Okay. I shall read.
Please, you can go.
Okay. In the 70s, the social sciences showed interest in researching the process of communicating science, largely from the influence of the STS movement and studies in philosophy of science. The conjunction of the natural sciences coming under growing critical scrutiny and the aspiration of social science to high academic status provided fertile ground with much funding directed at academic research into science communication and public attitudes toward science and technology. But why most of science communicators never read the leading journals in the field? Why that lack of interest on the work of science communication research? Just as an example, a critical vision of deficit model, for years a recurrent theme in science communication research, may shed light on this question. The problem is not in the deficit, but in the ways in which it may be acknowledged and focused on distinctive context, condition inherent to all dialogue, even between researchers and practitioners. The long road winding through the truism paradigm to the linguistics models, from the efforts by public understanding of science movement and Lowenstein's models to the communications theory model, a road ultimately returning to the insight that the public knowledge deficit may actually exist, reveals that theoretical approaches have not been very helpful to the practice of science communication. In this light, which theoretical models can best help us, has asked Trench. The influence of science communication research and consequent politicizing of the field has shown the creative nature of science communication to one side, especially as an object worthy of research, allowing the profession to become mainly a tool of politics is to deny its nature as literature and aesthetic experience, ignoring a long and illustrious tradition. Science communicators must vindicate the aesthetic value of our work, a vision rarely encountered in current research. Buki and many others have emphasized the need of the artistic approach. In full cognizance of the diversity and complexity of the field, science communicators need to hear from the researchers analysis of real practice, informed not so much by opposing visions, but rather of such visions existing on a continuum. Need to hear the findings of science communication researchers with a clear language, devoid of abstruseness. Practice of science communication should be treated as an independent academic subject with its sound investigation program different from the mentioned topics and traditional disciplinary perspectives of research. Researchers, more practitioners, practitioners, more researchers, and both teachers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a very, I would say, solid start for our session, really questioning these link and interactions between and reflecting on these links between research and practice. So Demisha, if you could stop the screen sharing, please. Questions, everybody to the Q&A, please. If you could just stop sharing your screen, please, then we'll go on to our next speaker.
Okay.
All right, perfect. Our next speaker will be, just a bit of sound, will be Elias. Elias is from Spain, and he's going to revisit a topic that I haven't heard about for a while, but it is a very prominent theme in some countries, and that is about using science shops for the co-creation of scientific knowledge between scientists and public groups. Over to you, Elias.
Okay, thank you, Marina. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you. I am going to share my screen, and my screen is what? This is this. Did you see my screen? I am going to.
Yes, you can start.
Okay. Yes. Can you see the screen? My screen. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Elias Sant. I am professor at the University Carlos III of Madrid. In this presentation, I would like to share with you the experiences we have had at the University Carlos III of Madrid in creating a science shop. Well, our science shop was one of the results of our collaboration in a European project of the Horizon 2020. The project lasted 30 months and involved 13 countries, European countries, and 18 institutions. The principal aims of this project were to analyze the characteristics of the European science shops and to create 10 new science shops into the participating institutions. What is a science shop? Well, the science shop are initiatives where researchers and citizens work together in order to solve the community problems or needs, etc. The main milestones of our work were in the first step. We work on the following tasks: the creation of Carlos III University Science Shop, the stakeholders' engagement with the science shop activities. This was very important for us, and the development of these activities. In the second step, we were seeking funding opportunities in order to maintain and to consolidate the science shop activities. We carry out three main types of activities. The first one was the co-creation events, with diverse stakeholders. Well, for example, in our poster, we show several pictures of the participation in different events. The second kind of activities was conducting several research projects in order to solve the community problems. And the third kind of activities were dissemination activities, for example, in workshops, seminars, etc. The final comments, I am going to talk about the different dimensions. For example, the first one, the strengths of our project, our results, because we have a very strong relationship with the municipalities.
Elias, can you wrap up, please?
Yes. We have started to solve problems in the local community. The second dimension, the weaknesses. We have some difficulties in engaging new stakeholders. We need to find some sources of funding. Next step, we are seeking new collaboration partners and we are exploring new sources of funding. Thank you very much. I am very sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, Marina.
That's
Thank
very,
you.
Yes, very, very interesting. Thank you so much. So if you can stop the screen sharing.
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on next to a very fascinating topic, and that is once again participatory science communication and participatory science in general, but this time embedded in the culture of New Zealand. And we go to Nancy Longnecker for that talk. I look forward to listening to you, Nancy.
Thank you. Can you see my screen? Oh no, here we go.
Not yet.
Yes, thank you, Nancy.
Okay. Kia ora koutou. Ko Nancy toku ingoa. I'm Nancy, and I'm presenting on behalf of 4 authors. We wrote a book. We wrote a chapter in a book, Aotearoa New Zealand. This is the New Zealand chapter of the book, Communicating Science, A Global Perspective, that Toss Gascoigne and colleagues edited and was put out last year. In our chapter, Aotearoa New Zealand, we talk about a lot of things that will sound familiar to people. We talked about a history of science communication in the country, a lot of environmental activities, participatory science or citizen science activities, and then the figure on the right-hand side, science communication in relation to in response to disasters and hazards like the earthquake in Christchurch. If we were writing this chapter now, we would obviously include something about the science communication that's allowed New Zealand to deal very effectively with COVID-19. The book and all of the chapters in it are free to download. There's a lot more to this chapter than what I have time to talk about here, so I encourage people to download it and read as many chapters as you can find time for. What I wanted to focus on here about Aotearoa New Zealand is something that is more unique and specific to New Zealand, and that is Vision Matauranga, which is Maori epistemology or Maori, a Maori worldview and a Maori knowledge. And this is the image that I created for this, this talk. And what it represents is on the left-hand side are aspects of Western science that will be familiar to all of us. Observation, experimentation, reproducibility, etc. So all of those are fundamental aspects of Western science. On the right-hand side, there's not a translation. On the right-hand side are concepts and constructs that are integral to Matauranga Maori, a Maori worldview. So we have things like whakapapa, which is genealogy or origins, where are we from, where are we going. Kaitiakitanga is a really important concept in Matauranga Maori. It's sustainable guardianship and protection, and it's especially important in environmental protection for future generations. Whakaiti is humility, which is very important concept in a lot of indigenous systems and in Maori leadership, not always so prevalent in Western science. This last slide is from the chapter itself. And in this slide, I actually we show in each of the rows an aspect of Western science and contrast it with Mataranga Maori. So for example, knowledge for control, for solutions, for controlling things, as opposed to knowledge in Mataranga Maori as being part of a system. Inclusion of facts and values is critical in Mataranga Maori for a holistic worldview, whereas they might be separated out in Western science. And I think that's probably my time up.
Yes.
But happy to answer questions later. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nancy, for that fascinating perspective. I think there's so much, points of interest, that's shared between countries and where, especially countries where there are, different cultures present, and we have to go this route of, explore science communication together. So I really enjoyed that, and I'm sure there will be questions. So the next speaker is actually the woman who's, to a large extent, one of the driving forces behind this conference that we're currently enjoying. Jenny Metcalf is going to give us her perspective on science communication models and how they are evolving. Thanks. Over to you, Jenny.
Thanks, Marina. I'm a science communication practitioner largely, and it's probably because of this that my PhD focused very much on how the practice of science communication might inform the thinking about the modelling of science communication. So I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of how my thinking evolved over the 7 years of my PhD. So I start with the linear model where scientists transmit their knowledge through to the public, which is commonly known as the deficit model. But I like to call it the dissemination model because I think the deficit model tends to make it a pejorative thinking. About 20, 25 years ago, people called for more dialogue between scientists and public. And so we have the dialogue, the sharing of knowledge between the two groups. However, and then more recently, there's been the participatory model where scientists are one group amongst a number of publics who are sharing knowledge in lots of different directions, often to solve a particular problem or issue that they're trying to deal with. And in my research, I looked at over 400 examples of Australian engaged science engagement activities. And in looking at this, I saw that there was overlap between the three models, as you can see here. And this is what I call my spectrum model of science communication. But I was concerned because it was still linear and there was still overlap between participation and deficit, for example, which led me to the Rosette model. And this Rosette model had this linkage happening, for example, between participation and between deficit. But it still didn't really show the real churn of science communication models in practice that I noticed in researching the practice of science communication. So what I ended up with is what I call my nexus model. And this is really a metaphor for the three models being all churned and mixed up together. There are three aspects of this I would like to highlight. The first is that in the center of this model, you'll see that there's relationships. And from my research, I saw that it's the relationships between scientists and various publics that really leads to whether outcomes are achieved or not. And the outcomes are the gray bits around the outside of this model. The second thing I want to emphasize about this model is that there are 6 different publics here, which include publics that might have happened through the science communication process. And so it's probably not exhaustive, but it shows that there are different publics in play here. And lastly, I wanted to emphasize the nexus between action, relationships, and outcomes. And it's those sorts of things that can create the desired outcomes that science communicators are after, which could include things like supported science, change behaviour, attitudes and decisions. This is a work in progress and it will continue on. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Jenny. I think definitely there's a food for thought, and I hope to see these models in future textbooks, because I think it really gives us a way to talk about. And I love the fact that you have emphasized relationships, at the core of these models, and that it mustn't stay in theory. It must actually be something that we can use to guide, in practice what we do when we engage with communities. So I hope, please, you're welcome already now to start posting questions in the Q&A, and we will come back to those at the end of the sessions. So our next speaker is going to tackle a topic that we sometimes try and avoid because it's hard, and that's evaluation. We look forward to listening to you, Luciano. And Luciano is based in Portugal. We can see your presentation. You can just go full screen and then you can start. Yes, you can start.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm trying to tackle that topic of evaluation because this presentation results from a project where we try to develop a non-obtrusive method to connect evaluation and science communication. Our idea was to evaluate science communication projects in a non-obtrusive way using virtual reality. I can talk a little bit about that later, but for that, we developed 2 empirical studies to understand how people made sense of science communication itself. I will go through those 2 studies, then present the results and try to promote a brief discussion about it. So our main aim was precisely to understand the social representations of science communication. This is to understand the meanings around this field and the way these representations and practice are connected. So social representations are a useful theoretical framework to understand how people make sense of the world and how they receive science and technology novelty. In study 1, we collected the views of almost 300 people through a technique called ranked association. So we had a stimulus and people then said what they think about science communication. And we can see here that their representation is a very loose one, mainly revolving around knowledge, studies, and then the dissemination model in brief. In the second study, we interviewed 10 responsible personnel from 2 science centers. And we also saw that their idea is based on the linear model coming from research and then disseminating that to the audience. And evaluation is thought of as an informal way of getting feedback, but there are no systematic approaches. So we think that we found out that the ideas about what science communication is still very poorly structured and very far away from participatory models. We believe that integrating communication and evaluation can also foster more participatory approach and theological models. And during the course of a project about deep seas, we tried to implement and develop and implement that method through virtual reality. And this is pretty much what I have to say in these 3 minutes. So thank you so much.
Thank you. That was perfect. And even under 3 minutes, thank you very much, Luciano, for that. Okay. If you can, perfect. Very interesting. I think it also became clear from your talk, evaluation is still something that people struggle with in practice to do it systematically. And I'm sure there will be questions for you as well. So, what can we learn from this? How can we improve, basically? So next, it's my pleasure to welcome a fellow science communication researcher or scholar from Africa, this time from Kenya, Rosalind Nambai. And she's going to give us her perspective on transforming relations between science communication practice and research. We look forward to hearing from you, Rosalind.
Thank you, Marina. Let me share my screen. So thank you very much, Marina. At the program, we have a very vibrant public engagement strategy. And what happens is that one of the key platforms for this engagement is the radio program, which has a very simple format. It's a weekly program, a 2-hour weekly program, where we send our researchers to the studio and they talk about their research study and the work that probably in one way or the other is relevant to the health of the communities around us. And the host engages them in these topics. Then the second 1 hour, the host opens up the phone lines, whereby they're able to allow the audiences to call in and mainly to just ask questions and even send text messages, mainly because the objective of this particular program is to stimulate dialogue around health research and health issues. So in my video, I mainly capture some of the experiences that our researchers who attended the studio sessions had for the second phase of this program, which was 2018-2019, and basically how this has impacted how they communicate their research work. This is a 2-minute video, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome.
My initial reaction was, what do you tell people? I'm a scientist, you know, how do I speak on radio?
Yeah, to be honest, I had not done a radio interview before, and it felt quite, you know, something of a surprise because I didn't feel like I was confident to do it.
We got some very difficult questions, and it was a very eye-opening experience for me.
Previously, I was more keen on epidemiology and studies on understanding the nature of disease, but following these radio shows, I've realized that I really need to invest much on research that addresses the problems of the people directly, to engage the community throughout the research process, right from conceptualizing the questions to looking for funds, and even after finalizing the research, it is important to communicate it back to the community.
It is important to be able to communicate what you do. Sometimes we do really high impact work, we do work that is so important, but we as scientists are not able to communicate it out there.
Like for me, I learned how to package my message in lay terms in a manner that I can converse with the general public.
The most interesting point was when we were given an opportunity to go and interact with them one-on-one through a radio fan club, where I was actually able to learn so much from them, and about some issues that I had not thought about, some lens which the community interprets epilepsy that a medical person doesn't.
Thank you, Marina. That was my video. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind. That was wonderful. I really loved hearing from the scientists directly and seeing some of you know, the actual community engagement, because we use the word so often, but to actually see it you know, in real life, that was really, really interesting. Thank you very much, and well done for producing the video yourself. That's amazing. Okay, so another topic that we are just as scared about sometimes as evaluation is quality. How do we measure quality in science communication? So we're going to go to Arko Olesk from Estonia to tell us more about this topic.
Yes, hello everyone. So since this is a visual presentation session, we decided to go fully visual and made a video about what we have done during a Horizon 2020 project called Quest. So it's a 3-minute video, and I will play it to you.
Thank you very much, Aka. Wow, that was certainly a lot of food for thought. And I can see the way that these 12 indicators that you've developed can be used in future research, and especially the way you've also summarized them in those 3 layers. And certainly a fantastic outcome, something tangible to work with in the future and to develop further and to debate and to reflect on. So thank you for sharing that. You've really grabbed the topic and ran with it. So I would love to hear more about how science communication practice can be a catalyst for science and the humanities. And that's exactly what Aya Toboli is going to talk about next. And she is based in Japan. We look forward to your presentation, Aya.
Okay. So can you see my presentation now?
Yes, it's there. You can go.
So my name is Aya Toboli, and I am a PIO at the Kavli Institute for the Physics and Mathematics of the Universe. And let me introduce my institution a little bit. So basically, my institution consists of three specialists: physicists, mathematicians, astronomers, mainly basic science, and like this. And I think there is a similarity between basic science and some traditional humanities, such as art and philosophy. That's fundamentality. So for art, I invite artists to my institution and open up artist in the program. So researchers and artists struggle on fundamentality and with two-way communication, and then open it to the public, like art exhibitions. And basically, artists stay in my institution and gave a talk to researchers and organize workshops and invite researchers to artist workspaces. And then finally, we got these exhibitions. We exhibited artworks made by Kavli IPM Artists in Residence program, joined artists, 3 artists, and 2 weeks, and 306 participants joined this program, this exhibition. And the space is like this, and the artworks are like this. And we also do this like with humanities. So people, research and the humanities, the artists struggle to fundamentality and communicate each other. And then general public see this and talk to each other. So we evaluate this Kavli IPMU Artists in Residence program art exhibition, inviting philosophy of science and art critics. And artists and scientists evaluate this program together. And also joining visitors join this program as well. And also much more philosophical way. So we invited aesthetics specialists and mathematical philosophy specialists and the scientists and artists talk together, and also general public think about this program as well. And we do these things much more, inviting philosophers, artists, and do these programs. And the survey is very simple. So this is the survey compared with our institution's basic science programs. And the result is these artist in residence art exhibitions getting high marks compared to the usual programs and get diverse audiences and show high level of interest in Kavli IPMU. So you can see these details in my posters. And I'd like to call this like catalyst model. So basic science and the humanities communicate each other and then see this general publics. And also usual science communication might be called applied science communication model because my science communication based on the basic science. So that's it. This is my presentation. Thank you for hearing.
Thank you very, very much, Aya. I think that was super interesting. And I think it's lovely to see these models emerging. And I think you're absolutely right. There's so much more we can explore about using art more effectively and these linkages to make science communication engaging and to really make it something that people are drawn to. Thank you very, very much for that. We're going to go next to our last speaker for today's session. And we know that despite all the other models emerging, the mass media remains very important. So Ji, we're looking forward to hearing from you about your research in China on the mass media as a key format for science communication. We can see your presentation. You can start.
Ji, you're muted.
Okay, if you can just make sure that you are unmuted so we can hear you.
Good morning, everyone. This is Ji Zhao from the National Academy of Innovation Strategy. Today, I will represent the group to present the study of the popular science mass media of China in comparative perspective. The background information is, it is emphasized in China that technology innovation and science popularization are like the two wings that drive innovative development. However, currently in China, the system is unbalanced. One of the main challenges is that the input in popular science is inadequate. We think that the scientists, enterprises, and mass media is not actively engaged in supporting science popularization. So in this research, we focus on the popular science mass media to study the difference between China's and abroad representative popular science mass media. So we picked Guoke as a Chinese case study. Guoke translated into English is like the nutshell, and the MIT Technology Review. Guoke is initially was a website. Now it developed into a pan-technology themed platform. It is widely opened to the general public. The slogan is "Science and technology are interesting." And after analyzing its posters, we found that Guoke focuses on the daily lives of the general public and meets the interests and the needs of the public. However, last poster is on the science policy or the controversial topics. It could be a protection mechanism for this grassroots company. Internationally, the MIT Technology Review is selected for comparison purpose. It was founded as a magazine in 1899. Now it provides information on its website, application, also send newsletters. We subscribe its newsletters for more than once, and especially in 2020, we found that much effort was put on the pandemic technology and the coronavirus. We found that the coverage is quite global and the contents are more serious. So after comparison purpose, this research is continue going on. So we think that we have a current conclusion for Guoke as a good popular science media example in China. Its content is interesting, its title is attractive, and the presentation method is diversified. However, the depth and the breadth of the content needs to be expanded, and the more scientific authority and the authenticity of the content are needed for currently. So that's all for today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very, very much, Ji. That's really, really interesting. And this comparison, I also love the analogy of, or the metaphor of the bird there and the two wings, and we needed two wings to fly, of course. So if you can just stop screen sharing there. I want to thank once again all the speakers for sticking to time and for inspiring us with these reflections on your research and practice in the field of science communication. So now we have quite a group of delegates. I see we already have some questions, but before we get to the Q&A, I'm going to ask you all to just do something red stuff, and that is to vote for the speaker that you most enjoy today, the talk that you would love to see again in the conference itself. So the presenters cannot vote, but all the other delegates can. So I would love to see as many of you as possible casting your votes, please. Going to give us another few seconds for the voting. Got a few more people. If you could just cast your votes quickly, with about 5 more seconds or so. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you very, very much. So watch this space for the announcement of the winning presentations. And then you can also keep an eye on the announcements that, when you can see this visual presentation of all the winning talks. So we're going to go to the Q&A now. If you have a problem sending your question via the Q&A, Isabella, you can put it in the chat. I'll also have a look there. But let's start with one that has been upvoted by many people, and that is a question to Jenny from Carlo. It says, Jenny, thank you for your great work, supported by compelling visualizations. You said that the Nexus model may not be exhaustive, and therefore my curiosity is about how could we integrate into this model new SciComm practices, new audiences, or different types of dialogue that could emerge in future? Over to you, Jenny.
Great question, Carlo. And what I hope is that this model can be tested by other researchers looking at practice in the future. So new science communication practices could look at and gather empirical knowledge about this model and see how it could translate in different situations with new practices, different publics or audiences, and different types of dialogue. But I am planning to do that sometime in the near future, and hopefully then people can take that and test it and play with it. It certainly would hate to see it as a static model. It's something that can be constantly evolving and developing as things go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Okay, so next we're going to go to Nancy. And the question to you, Nancy, is can you speak a bit more about the Maori scientific knowledge perspective and how it can help us to understand better local environment? The question comes from Fernando, who's in Brazil. And he also asked how we can use this to grow the exchange of Western science communications through native cultures. I'm sure he talks about the exchange between local and of Western cultures. Nancy, it's your turn.
Yes, that is a fantastic question, Fernando. And I'm Pakeha, which in Maori is a non-Maori person. So I speak with limited expertise, but I'll do my best. And that's a really complex, obviously, you know that, it's a complex question. And one thing that just came to mind is that Indigenous people around the world, I heard this the other day in a talk that I went to, control, a tiny proportion of the world's, land mass in the world. And I think it was something like 5%. And yet in that land mass is about 95% of the remaining biodiversity in the world. And so this comes back to that idea, the Maori idea of guardianship and kaitiakitanga, which is so important, not just in a Maori worldview, but in most Indigenous worldview. The connection, I think it goes to Jenny's model actually, is that it's all about relationships and respect for different perspectives and different worldviews, and for local knowledge, Indigenous knowledge or other forms of local knowledge, and integrating those into the way we see the world and the way we whether we can incorporate that into sustainable protection. I could go on, and maybe we can have a further discussion offline. I don't know, but that's a great question. Thank you.
Nancy, while we are with you, I want to ask you also, there's another question from Isabella that says, did you look into transferring these findings into other communities or countries? It seems to me that these points would change science, if not more. So once again, but maybe just respond to the issue of, what are you doing to try and take this to, test this maybe in other countries, or at least transfer? Of course, publishing a book chapter on it is a good start. Presenting today is another way of doing it. Maybe anything else?
Is that a question for me? Sorry. Or
yes,
it's
also for you. It's also for you. It's about.
Sorry, I have not. I have not looked a lot at different indigenous cultures, and I mean, I know a bit about Australia from having lived there for 30 years, but I wouldn't call it expertise at all. So no, we haven't done comparative studies of indigenous knowledge frameworks in different countries. That would be a fascinating and huge undertaking, but no, I have not done that.
And I guess it will be specifically complex if you have many cultures coexisting in the same country. I want to go next to Arco. Question for you, and it's from the chat, and it says, have you tested your 12 indicators of quality? And if so, what tools did you use to measure these 12 indicators or 12 dimensions?
Yes, we have tested them only so far as to go back to the different stakeholders, researchers, science communication professionals in various areas like museums or university specialists or journalists, and going back to them and asking, is this the list that you find you can work with? And the response has been positive so far. But indeed, we see avenues there to move forward, most importantly, because what we describe is the viewpoint from the stakeholders. And we need to determine now whether quality actually translates to effectiveness. So if we have content that matches those quality criteria, does it also work better for the audience? And this is something that we have not yet done. This may be a future avenue. So this will be most important. But I would also like to emphasize that we actually do not see that we should use this as a normative list of quality criteria. So it's not that we should start evaluating all science communication based on these indicators, because most of these, as you probably realized yourself, are really hard to quantify or measure or evaluate in a way. So what we've done is we've created a number of checklists for people who work in science communication based on these indicators. And this checklist basically asks, have you considered this or that? Have you looked into this aspect, to make sure that they have considered these various aspects? And these checklists or guiding questions in a way then support this evaluation and maybe somehow measurement as well.
Okay. So Arco, just a follow-up question. Is that checklist available on the Quest website?
Yes, there is this initial version that is already available there with the guiding questions next to each indicator. But as the project proceeds, we will release further guidelines for separate strands. So for journalists, for researchers, for science communication professionals, for example, in museums. So these will be available shortly as well.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to go to a question from Luis for Luciano. Luciano, he says you've done great work. I know there's a ton of work you cannot show us in 3 minutes, but he asked something, it's almost like, did you evaluate your evaluation? So he says, did you try several different sets of questions or different sets of questions for the population? I mean, is there a way that you evaluate that part of the study? In other words, did you evaluate your own questions? That's how I understand it. Can you try to respond?
Yes, thank you for the question. So what we presented here was a kind of our exploratory studies to understand how people made sense of science communication. That helped us to integrate our science communication project into science centers. What we did was to develop a set of infographics about the deep seas. And then we created a virtual reality experience based on transformational play. And then we had more classic devices to evaluate. We developed, for example, a questionnaire and attitudes towards the deep seas. And then we try to match those results, those dimensions that we identified in the questionnaire. So the attitudes towards preservation, towards scientific exploration, towards economic exploration of the deep seas, and the choices that the participants took during the virtual reality experience. To give you an example, at the beginning, they need to choose a character. So they wanted to engage in the experience as a scientist, environmental activist, or an economist. And actually these choices matched with the attitudes towards each of these dimensions in the questionnaire. So the idea was to get different indicators, non-obtrusive. So the person would give the answers in an engaging experience while she was still making sense of the contents, and also showing what she learned from being exposed to the infographics before. So this was a way of understanding the level, in this case, of awareness towards the reality. So in a way, we try to get different indicators, and I'm very grateful for the question.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Jenny, quick question for you, coming back to your models. Brian asks, Brian Trench, could you imagine a dynamic version of the Nexus model in which the relationships, publics, and outcomes rotate independently to create numerous permutations? Would that be useful?
I would love to do that, but I don't know. It makes my brain hurt thinking about it, how you would construct that. It would have to be in a number of different dimensions, but I think that sounds really exciting, and it could take the model even further.
I can sort of see it happening in a sort of animation already. So Arko, I'm not going to ask you to respond again, but there was a comment from Siddharth about, wouldn't it be great if we could expand your research to the global south, to more countries? And I second that. I would love, that would really be interesting to then test these indicators and so on in other countries, in other parts of the world, because obviously your current research, being EU funded, mostly focused on countries in Europe. And so talk to us if you're interested in going to the global south. I want to ask a quick question of Rosalind. Rosalind, you showed us that wonderful video with the comments from the researchers themselves. What stood out most for you from the researchers in the difference that participating in that radio program made? What is the one big takeaway, most exciting sort of lesson learned for you yourself?
What I learned is that there is hunger out there for knowledge when it comes to science and probably health research. There's so much hunger, and that is why it wasn't even possible to document the whole thing, because you have a whole film. After the second phase, we created a whole film, which is actually longer. But looking at the interactions that we had every week, and this was a whole year production. And so every week you have 2 hours running, and you have SMSs, text messages coming in, you have calls coming in during the last 1 hour. And after 3 months, we will go out, and like one of the researchers talked about being privileged to be part of the fan club meetings that we had. We used that as our one of the evaluation tools, just to understand what the community was saying about the radio. And you could feel, and you could actually practically see the hunger and the need for us to communicate more. And that is why even after that 1 year production, now we are rolling out another phase, now our third phase, starting next month, the first week of June. And now we are not just going into one radio program. We're actually going to 5 different radio programs, because there's been, the audience are asking, and even other radio stations are coming up more with the same formats. And even the original radio station now has adopted that because they realize the fans, the listeners are still calling in. So basically, it's just the encouragement that there is hunger out there, especially for us coming from Africa, where there is no culture of science communication and people just talking about science. When you provide that platform, that's when you realize, wow, we need to do this again and again. That is why one of the researchers said, we do our research, but really, we need to get out there and talk to them about it. So the need and the desire and the hunger for me stood out really well.
I see Isabella has asked, did you see that the scientists are open to this kind of work? But I think your video to some extent showed us, that maybe initially they were hesitant, but afterwards they felt it really made a big difference. And that is a challenge. I think we are slowly running out of time. I wanted to just pose one question to Nimisha. He was our very first presenter, and I think it's a question that cuts across everything we talked about today. And this is, so I want to ask Nimisha to respond very briefly, but if anybody else wants to add, how good are science communication researchers themselves at communicating their own research? Are they doing a good job? Are they making their own research accessible to practitioners and engaging to practitioners? What is your view on that?
Okay, as I said, I think practitioners need to make more research about the practice we are doing. And I don't see that exactly. I'm a practitioner for 45 years ago, and I'm a researcher too. And there are some, they are different. My practice is, and my research is in other way. They help, but there is no exact relationship between these and I see that in many of my colleagues, practitioners. They effectively don't read theory because theory doesn't have an effect on practices. This is the result. This is the thinking about the practice and research. This is the real thing with which we work every day.
Right.
Okay, we practice. We don't have to see any. They have to see with theory. We don't have to think in models. We don't have to think in deficit model. Never. We don't. I don't know where is the deficit model. No? We don't have. We haven't find anyone when we have been working in practice.
This is something to think about. Yeah, I agree with you. So I want to conclude. We're actually running out of time now, but just as a wrap up, maybe a final thought from Z and from Aya. Because both of you did research that was focused on a practical component. What do you think we can do to increase, this interaction and dialogue and better connections between research and practice in science communication?
I think you
maybe
have
can
to
we
see,
go, Nimisha? Okay. I want to give G an opportunity to respond, maybe, and Aya, and then we unfortunately have to wrap it up. G, do you want to respond?
Or maybe I can give quick answer.
Okay, Aya, you can start, right?
Yeah, because I'm making connection between scientists and other areas, especially humanity. So if you just say scientists, the gap appears between audience and scientists. But if you put scientists and specialists from other areas, I think this will solve this situation. That is my point. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. That's a very interesting perspective. G, final word from you. Just put on your mic, please.
I did catch the question. Could you repeat it?
I'm only asking you for a final perspective, maybe just a thought on how do we create better linkages between researchers and practice in science communication?
I think that we could put my foot in the practice shoes and think the surrounding environment. I think maybe the questions, the problem they were facing, I think that's the solution. I think that's the suggestion.
Yeah. Bring them together in the real world. Yes.
Yeah,
so thank you very, very much to a fantastic panel with wonderful presentations. I wish we had another hour. I have so many more questions. Look, please remember that all these presentations, the original visuals, as well as today's talks, will be available on the conference platform. You can engage with the presenters. You can get in touch with them in that way. I think many of us are now inspired to go and look at the book chapters and the reports from the research we heard about today. It was really a fantastic session. I want to thank all of you, also the audience, for the lively participation. And we see you all online many times more in the next month through this wonderful PCST conference ahead of us. Thank you very much and goodbye.